My daughter-in-law called me a pig at my own son's wedding reception. She thought I was just an overweight, old-fashioned widow embarrassing her in front of high society. What she didn't know was that the very next Monday, I would be walking into her father's headquarters, not as a guest, but as his new CEO. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to channel. I never imagined that the worst insult of my life would come wrapped in white lace and champagne bubbles. Weddings are supposed to be joyful. They're meant to unite families, not expose the fractures hidden beneath them. But that afternoon, beneath crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed tablecloths, I learned something about humiliation and about power. My name is Farah Malik. I am 58 years old, a widow of 12 years, and the mother of one son, my entire heart, my only child, Ayan. I raised him alone after my husband passed from a sudden heart attack. We didn't come from money. I worked 2 jobs at one point, school secretary by day, bookkeeping assistant by night, so Ayan could attend a good university. I ironed his shirts before every exam like it was armor. I packed his lunches with handwritten notes. I told him he would build a life bigger than mine. And he did. He met Zahra in his final year of business school. She was beautiful, polished, confident in a way I never learned to be. The first time I met her, she hugged me lightly as if I were fragile glass. She wore perfume that cost more than my weekly groceries. She smiled at me, but her eyes evaluated. Zahra came from wealth. Her father owned a multinational logistics company. They lived in a gated community where even the sidewalks looked expensive. When Ayan told me they were engaged, I was genuinely happy for him. Love doesn't care about background, I told myself. Love builds bridges. But sometimes bridges only work one way. The wedding was extravagant, far more than anything I would have planned. Ayan insisted they pay for everything. Ami, you've done enough, he told me. Just enjoy it. I nodded and swallowed the small ache in my chest. I had always imagined contributing to my son's wedding, but this wasn't about me. The venue was breathtaking. Imported orchids hung from archways. A live string quartet played softly near the fountain. Guests wore designer suits and gowns that shimmered under the lights. I wore my best sari, a deep emerald green silk I had saved for years. It wasn't designer, it didn't sparkle, but it was mine. At first, everything smoothed smoothly. I greeted guests, I smiled, I endured polite curiosity. "Oh, you're Ayan's mother?" some asked, as if surprised someone like me could produce someone like him. I kept my chin high. The reception began after sunset. Speeches were made, toasts were raised. Zahra looked radiant beside my son. And I allowed myself, just for a moment, to feel proud. Then came the cake cutting. I stood near the front with a small group of relatives. Zahra's friends crowded around her, laughing loudly. One of them, tall, blonde, impossibly thin, whispered something to her ear while glancing at me. I should have ignored it, but I saw Zahra's lips curve, not kindly. She didn't realize I was close enough to hear. "Can someone please move her?" she said in a hushed but irritated tone. "The photographer said family only, and honestly, I don't want that pig in my wedding photos." There was a ripple of nervous laughter from her friends. For a second, I didn't understand. My brain refused to process the word pig. My hands went cold. The music continued playing. Glasses clinked somewhere behind me. My own heartbeat roared in my ears. I looked around to see if anyone else had heard. 2 of her friends avoided eye contact. One smirked. Zahra adjusted her veil and added softly, "I mean, look at her. She's sweating all over that cheap sari." My throat tightened. I suddenly became aware of my body in a way I never had before. The weight I had gained after menopause, the fine lines around my mouth, the way my sari clung to my curves. I wanted the ground to swallow me. But then something else happened. I saw Ayan approaching from across the room, smiling, completely unaware. And in that moment, I made a choice. I stepped back quietly. I let the photographer take the pictures. I swallowed the insult whole because I refused to ruin my son's wedding day with my pain. No one came to apologize. No one corrected her. The evening moved forward as if nothing had happened. But something inside me shifted. I stayed until the final dance. I hugged Diane tightly before leaving. Zara gave me a brief air kiss and whispered, "You should have worn something more flattering." I drove home alone that night. I sat in my living room in the dark. The silence in that boardroom stretched longer than it should have. I watched Mr. Rahman's expression recalibrate itself in real time, confusion smoothing into corporate politeness, shock swallowed by calculation. He had built an empire over 30 years. Men like him did not lose composure easily. Yet in that moment, he understood something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer simply Ayan's mother. I was his equal in title and in authority. "Congratulations," he said finally, forcing a thin smile as he took his seat along the side of the long mahogany table. "This is unexpected." I folded my hands calmly. Growth often is. The board chair cleared his throat and began outlining transition protocols, financial reports, restructuring timelines. I listened carefully, asking pointed questions, demonstrating exactly why they had chosen me. I did not glance at Mr. Rahman again, but I felt his gaze resting on me more than once, measuring, reassessing. By the end of the meeting, it was clear I was not there as a symbolic appointment. I had come with a plan, one that required discipline, cost reductions, and accountability at every level, including executive leadership. After the session concluded, the others filtered out, leaving only the two of us in the room. He stood slowly. "I assume this puts us in an interesting position," he said. I met his eyes without hesitation. "Professionally, yes. Personally, that depends on how we choose to behave." He studied me carefully, perhaps searching for resentment or vengeance. I offered him neither. "I trust you'll find me fair," I added. "Firm, but fair." He gave a short nod, the kind powerful men give when they recognize strength they didn't anticipate. "I look forward to collaboration," he replied, though his tone suggested he would prefer control. As I stepped into my new office, his former office, I paused for just a moment by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the morning sun. 12 years ago, when my husband died, I had stood at my kitchen sink wondering how I would afford electricity. Life is not linear. It bends quietly, gathering force in places others cannot see. I sat at the large oak desk and opened my laptop. Work steadied me. Strategy steadied me. Emotion could wait. By midday, the company-wide announcement had gone out. Emails flooded in, congratulations from senior managers, cautious introductions from department heads, polite curiosity from investors. Then, just after lunch, my phone buzzed. Ayan. I stared at his name for a second before answering. "Ami, big news," he said, his voice bright. "Have you seen the announcement?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Yes." "This is incredible. Zara's father's company, CEO? Ami, that's huge." His pride sounded genuine, and it warmed something in me that had cooled since the wedding. "It is a responsibility," I replied carefully. There was a slight pause on the line. "Zara was surprised," he added lightly. "She didn't know you were even interviewing." "There are many things we don't know about each other," I said softly. He didn't catch the weight in my words. "We should all have dinner soon to celebrate. At their house, maybe?" I imagined Zara's reaction when she realized the woman she mocked would now sit across from her at executive meetings with her father. "We'll see," I said. That evening, as I reviewed financial projections, a discreet knock sounded at my office door. Zara stood there. She wore a fitted beige dress, her hair sleek, her posture confident, but her eyes betrayed tension. "May I come in?" she asked. Her tone was polished, professional, not warm. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. She entered slowly, closing the door behind her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm. "Congratulations," she said finally. "Thank you." She crossed her legs, smoothing her dress unnecessarily. "I didn't realize you were still working at this level." I held her gaze. People often underestimate what they don't take the time to understand. A flicker passed through her eyes. Irritation? Embarrassment? It was hard to tell. "Well," she continued, "this certainly changes dynamics." "In what way?" I asked evenly. She hesitated. "Family and business can be complicated." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "They can, which is why professionalism is essential." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was not accustomed to being the smaller presence in a room. "I assume," she said carefully, "that personal matters will remain separate from corporate decisions." There it was. Fear. Not loud, not dramatic, but present. I folded my hands. "Zara, I have spent my entire career earning respect in rooms where I was the only woman, the only widow, the only person without inherited wealth. I do not blur lines." I let a brief pause settle between us. "Can you say the same?" Color rose slightly in her cheeks. She looked away first. "Of course," she said stiffly. I stood then, signaling the meeting was over. "Good. Because the company requires unity. We have restructuring ahead. I expect cooperation from every department, including yours." She rose as well, composure returning like armor snapping into place. "You'll have it." She reached the door, then stopped. For a fraction of a second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, "I hope this doesn't make things awkward at family gatherings." I met her gaze one final time. Respect prevents awkwardness. She left without another word. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. I had not mentioned the wedding, not the word pig, not the laughter. Power does not need to shout. It simply stands. Over the next week, I immersed myself in the company's operations. I uncovered inefficiencies long ignored, contracts poorly negotiated, loyalty-based appointments that cost the firm millions. Mr. Rahman and I met daily. He resisted some changes, agreed to others, but gradually he understood I was not there to dismantle his legacy. I was there to protect it from collapse. Meanwhile, Ayan seemed blissfully unaware of the undercurrent running beneath his marriage. He spoke of honeymoon plans, investment ideas, future children. I listened, offering advice when asked, yet a quiet question lingered in my heart. If he ever had to choose between truth and comfort, which would he choose? One Friday evening, an invitation arrived from Zara, dinner at their home. "To celebrate leadership and family unity," the message read. I stared at the words for a long time. Unity is easy when everyone feels superior. It becomes fragile when balance shifts. I accepted, because some lessons are not taught through revenge, they are revealed through presence, and I intended to be very present. The evening of the dinner arrived with a quiet kind of tension I could feel in my shoulders as I fastened the clasp of my pearl earrings. I chose my clothing carefully, not extravagant, not intimidating. A soft charcoal silk blouse, tailored black trousers, and a structured blazer. Understated strength. I was not going to their home to perform power. I was going to embody it. The ramen residence sat behind tall iron gates wrapped in manicured vines, the kind of house that seems to announce wealth before you even see the front door. A security guard checked my name with polite efficiency before allowing me through. As my car rolled up the curved driveway, I remembered the first time I had visited this house for Ayan's engagement dinner. That night, I had felt small. Tonight, I felt steady. Zara opened the door herself. Her smile was flawless, practiced. "Welcome," she said lightly, air kissing beside my cheek. "We're so glad you could make it." Her eyes scanned my outfit quickly. Assessment again. I met her gaze calmly. "Thank you for inviting me." Inside, the house glowed with warm lighting and curated elegance. Crystal bowls, abstract art, imported rugs, everything placed with intention. Mr. Raman stood near the fireplace holding a glass of sparkling water. When he saw me, he inclined his head respectfully. "Mrs. Malik." "Mr. Raman." The acknowledgement between us was subtle but significant. Ayan came rushing from the dining area, wrapping his arms around me. "Ami, you look beautiful," he said sincerely. I held him for a second longer than usual. "So do you, Beta." We gathered around a long dining table set with fine china. A private chef moved discreetly in the kitchen beyond. Conversation began cautiously: business performance, honeymoon stories, upcoming expansion plans. I noticed how Zara steered topics towards safe territory, carefully avoiding anything that might hint at imbalance. Halfway through the main course, Mr. Rahman cleared his throat. "I must say," he began, looking at me, "the board's response to your restructuring proposal has been overwhelmingly positive." I nodded slightly. "The numbers speak for themselves." Zara shifted in her seat. "Father has always been very protective of the company," she added, almost offensively. "As he should be." I took a sip of water before continuing. "Legacy matters, but so does adaptation." Ayan looked between us, sensing an undercurrent he couldn't quite name. "I think it's incredible you two are working together," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "Family business success story." Zara's smile tightened. "Yes, incredible." The words sounded thinner than she intended. Dessert arrived, delicate pistachio pastries dusted in gold flakes. As plates were set down, Zara finally addressed what had been hovering in the air since I walked in. "I'll admit," she said, folding her napkin neatly, "I underestimated you." The table went still. Ayan looked confused. Mr. Rahman's eyes flicked toward his daughter sharply. I placed my fork down gently. "In what way?" I asked, though we both knew. She hesitated. For a moment, the polished exterior faltered. "I didn't realize how accomplished you were." There it was again, that subtle hierarchy she had constructed in her mind: worth measured by wealth, visibility equated with value. "Accomplishment," I said calmly, "does not always announce itself." My tone wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. She swallowed, then forced a small laugh. "I suppose we all make assumptions." I held her gaze calmly, allowing silence to stretch just enough to be uncomfortable. "Yes," I agreed softly, "we do." Ayan reached for her hand under the table, sensing tension but not understanding its roots. I wondered briefly whether he had heard her words at the wedding and chosen silence. That thought still unsettled me. After dinner, we moved to the sitting room for tea. The men drifted into business discussion near the bar, leaving Zara and me seated across from each other on cream-colored armchairs. The distance between us felt symbolic. "I hope you don't think I'm intimidated," she said quietly once we were alone. I studied her carefully. Beneath the confidence was something fragile, ego built on uninterrupted privilege. "Intimidation is a personal experience," I replied. "Only you know if you feel it." She stiffened slightly. "I simply believe respect goes both ways." My heartbeat slowed, steady and controlled. This was the moment. Not for revenge, for truth. "It does," I said, "which is why words matter." Her eyes flickered, confusion mixing with dawning realization. Words? She repeated. I leaned forward just slightly. At the wedding, I said gently, you referred to me as a pig. The color drained from her face. For a second, she looked genuinely shocked, then defensive. You must have misunderstood. I did not. My voice remained calm, almost quiet. That steadiness unsettled her more than anger would have. I was close enough that I heard every syllable. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The memory was clearly resurfacing for her. The whisper, the laughter, the assumption I was out of earshot. I was stressed, she said finally, grasping for justification. It was my wedding. Things were chaotic. I nodded slowly. Stress reveals character. Silence pressed in around us. In the distance, I could hear Ayan's laughter with his father-in-law, unaware of the reckoning unfolding feet away. Why didn't you say anything? Zara asked, her voice smaller now. Because it was my son's wedding, I answered simply, and I would not let my pain stain his joy. She looked down at her hands. For the first time I'd known her, she appeared young, not powerful, not superior, just young. I didn't know you'd heard, she whispered. That was the point, I replied. The truth settled between us like a mirror neither of us could avoid. I stood slowly. I am not angry, I said, but I will not be disrespected again, not in public, not in private. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. After the dinner at Zara's house, I felt a subtle shift within the household. The air no longer carried the weight of silent judgment. Zara's demeanor, while still poised, seemed slightly more reflective, as if she were finally beginning to notice the ripple her words had caused. That weekend, I returned to the office, stepping into the bright, polished hallways of Rachman Global. The hum of activity greeted me, the chatter of executives, the soft clacking of keyboards, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Everything had a rhythm now, a pulse I had established with care and diligence. I walked past the marketing department and noticed Zara at her desk, meticulously reviewing reports. Her expression was focused, and I could sense the invisible pressure she carried, the unspoken understanding that she was no longer just the daughter of the founder. Her ideas now had to withstand scrutiny. Her presentations needed precision. No more shortcuts, no more assumptions. I paused briefly at her doorway. "Do you need anything?" I asked softly. She looked up, startled, then shook her head. "No, thank you," she said. There was no arrogance in her tone, only concentration. I nodded once and moved on, allowing the silence to convey my presence without interference. Later that day, I received an email marked urgent from the finance department. A review of quarterly performance had revealed inefficiencies in one of the subsidiaries, one managed by a family-appointed executive who had overlooked compliance measures for years. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they were a glaring oversight that could impact investor confidence. I took a deep breath, recognizing that this was another test of leadership. I scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning. When the board gathered, I presented the findings clearly and professionally. Zara was present, seated across the table, and I could see the tension in her posture. She realized, perhaps more acutely than anyone else, that accountability applied to everyone, regardless of familial ties. I outlined a corrective plan, immediate restructuring of the subsidiary, reassignment of leadership responsibilities, and implementation of oversight protocols. Our company's legacy depends on fairness, diligence, and accountability, I said firmly. Personal relationships cannot undermine our responsibility to stakeholders and employees. Mr. Rockman listened quietly, his jaw tight, weighing the impact of my recommendations. Zara's eyes flickered toward him, perhaps hoping for a reprieve that wouldn't come. After a pause, he nodded slowly. "Proceed," he said. There was no debate, no hesitation. This moment crystallized something I had long suspected. True respect is earned, not inherited. After the meeting, Zara approached me privately in the hallway. "You didn't hesitate," she said quietly. even when it could have embarrassed my father or the family. I smiled faintly. Accountability is not optional, it is responsibility. She looked down, absorbing the weight of the lesson. I see that now, she admitted softly. I've grown up believing loyalty meant shielding family at all costs, even when mistakes are obvious. But that isn't leadership. Her words surprised me, though not entirely. The reflection in her eyes, the vulnerability, was something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't contrived, it wasn't calculated, it was genuine realization. Growth often begins with uncomfortable truth, I said gently, and humility makes it possible. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and walked away, her shoulders straighter, her steps measured. The next few days were marked by subtle but noticeable changes. Zara volunteered to assist with compliance checks personally. She reviewed financial reports with renewed diligence, and her team noticed a more collaborative, accountable approach. Meanwhile, I continued to implement restructuring measures, slowly improving efficiency and profitability. The company's momentum began to shift. The staff responded positively to the transparent standards I had set, and even longtime executives began to respect the clarity and fairness in leadership decisions. One afternoon, as I returned from a meeting, Ayan called. Ami, Zara's been telling me about the new processes at work. She's different, I think, more thoughtful. I can see it in how she talks about the company now. I paused, sensing both pride and caution. Change takes time, I said softly, and understanding. He sighed. I guess she's realizing there's more to respect than just family ties. I smiled quietly. Exactly, and it's a lesson for all of us. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones closest to home. Later that week, a private dinner was scheduled with Mr. Rockman and Zara to discuss long-term corporate strategy. As I walked into the sleek boardroom, I noticed Zara standing near the window, reviewing a presentation on her tablet. There was an air of quiet focus, but this time it carried humility, not arrogance. Mr. Rockman greeted me warmly, his expression neutral yet approving. I trust you've both reviewed the updated subsidiary reports? He asked. Zara nodded. Yes, Father, she said. I've also suggested a plan to prevent similar issues in the future. I wanted to take responsibility directly. The sincerity in her tone surprised even me. I could see Mr. Rockman's pride flicker. He had always valued initiative, and this was genuine accountability. Very well, he replied. I expect full implementation, and I trust your judgment. As the evening progressed, I observed the subtle transformation, not just in the company, but in the family dynamic. Zara was no longer the woman who had whispered cruel words at my wedding. She was a professional, a daughter, a soon-to-be mother learning to balance privilege with responsibility. And in witnessing her growth, I recognized a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, it was evolution. The week ended with a private dinner with Mr. Rockman and Zara to discuss long-term corporate strategy. As I walked into the sleek boardroom and the masculization of Zara, the week ended with a family lunch at my apartment. Ayan, Zara, and I gathered over food, laughing softly over trivial stories. There was no tension, no power struggle, only shared moments. Zara's demeanor was warmer, her gestures more considerate, and I realized that respect, once earned, created a ripple effect far beyond corporate walls. As I prepared for the weeks that followed that dinner unfolded with a precision I had come to respect in corporate life. Change rarely explodes, it recalibrates. At Ramen Global, the restructuring began to show results faster than even I had projected. Contracts were renegotiated, redundant executive expenses were trimmed. Departments that had once operated like private kingdoms were now accountable to measurable performance standards. Investors responded positively. The board's confidence in my leadership deepened. And with every improvement, the quiet narrative inside the company shifted. I was no longer the new CEO. I was simply the CEO. Rahman adapted with surprising pragmatism. Though pride flickered occasionally in his eyes during strategy meetings, he could not deny the numbers. Profit margins rose, operational waste declined. For a man who valued legacy, results spoke louder than ego. Zara, however, struggled more visibly. Her role in corporate communications required her to collaborate closely with my office. She had always operated with social ease, gliding through events, charming stakeholders, projecting polish. But now, every proposal she submitted came across my desk for approval. Every campaign budget required justification. There was no favoritism, no indulgence, only standards. I treated her exactly as I treated every other executive, and perhaps that unsettled her more than punishment would have. One afternoon, during a quarterly review presentation, Zara miscalculated projected outreach costs. It was not catastrophic, but it revealed carelessness. The boardroom was full. Directors, department heads, senior advisors. She stood at the front, tablet in hand, confidence wavering as I asked her to clarify the discrepancy. "It's a minor adjustment," she said quickly. "The impact is negligible." I maintained a neutral expression. "Negligible expenses compound over time. Please revise the figures and resubmit by tomorrow morning." The correction was professional, calm, but public. A faint flush crept up her neck as she nodded. For a fleeting second, I saw resentment flash across her face, the reflex of someone unused to accountability in front of peers. Yet she complied. After the meeting, Mr. Rahman lingered behind. "You're firm with her," he observed. "I am firm with everyone," I replied evenly. He studied me thoughtfully. "She's learning." I allowed a small pause. "So am I." That evening, Ayan came to my apartment unexpectedly. He looked tired, a faint crease between his brows that hadn't been there months ago. I made tea and waited. He paced near the window before finally speaking. "Ami, is everything okay at work?" I met his eyes. "Why do you ask?" He hesitated. "Zara feels like you're being harder on her than necessary." The words were careful, diplomatic. My heart tightened, not with anger, but with disappointment. "Do you believe that?" I asked gently. He looked conflicted. "I don't know. I just know she feels pressured." I nodded slowly. "Leadership is pressure." He sat down heavily. "She says you're different at the office." I allowed myself a faint smile. "At the office, I am not someone's mother-in-law. I am responsible for thousands of employees and millions in revenue." Silence settled between us. "Did something happen at the wedding?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer now. There it was, the question he had avoided. I studied his face, the same eyes I had kissed goodnight when he was 5, the same boy who once cried when a classmate mocked my simple clothes at a school function. "Why would you ask that?" I said carefully. He exhaled slowly. "I overheard something. I wasn't sure." My pulse slowed. "What did you hear?" He looked down at his hands. "I heard Zara say something about you're sorry. I thought maybe I misunderstood." I held his gaze steadily. "You did not misunderstand." Pain flickered across his face. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice tight. I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "Because it was your wedding day." His jaw clenched. "That's not an excuse." "It was not about excuse," I said softly. "It was about timing." He stood abruptly, pacing again. "She called you that?" The word hovered unspoken between us. I nodded once. His shoulders sagged, shame replacing confusion. "I should have said something." "Perhaps," I agreed gently, "but you were beginning a marriage. I chose peace." He stopped walking and looked at me with something deeper than guilt. Understanding. "Is that why things feel tense?" I considered the question. Tension comes from imbalance correcting itself, not from revenge. He was quiet for a long moment. "I love her," he said finally. "I know, but I won't tolerate her disrespecting you." The firmness in his voice surprised me. I saw the man he had become, no longer a boy seeking approval. I squeezed his hand. Respect must be mutual, between all of us. The following week brought an unexpected development. An external audit, initiated before my appointment, revealed financial irregularities in a subsidiary Zara's uncle managed. It wasn't criminal, but it was negligent. Oversight had been lax for years, protected by family loyalty. Now the issue landed squarely on my desk. The board expected decisive action. I called an emergency executive session. Zara and her father sat across from me as I outlined the findings. We cannot allow personal relationships to override fiduciary responsibility, I stated clearly. Mr. Rahman's expression hardened. Zara looked stricken. He's family, she said quietly. The restructuring of the subsidiary moved forward swiftly. Papers were signed, leadership roles reassigned, oversight tightened. Zara's uncle stepped down with forced grace, issuing a formal statement about pursuing personal ventures. In reality, he had been shielded for years by familiarity and blood ties. Now, the shield was gone. I watched carefully how everyone responded. In companies built by families, loyalty often disguises weakness, but strength is measured by what you are willing to correct. The morning after the announcement, Zara requested a private meeting in my office. Her message was brief. "We need to talk." When she entered, she did not carry her usual polished confidence. There was no designer handbag dangling from her arm, no subtle performance in her posture. She closed the door behind her and remained standing for a moment, as if gathering courage. "You embarrassed my father," she said quietly. I folded my hands on the desk. "No," I replied evenly. "The audit did." She inhaled sharply, frustration rising. "You could have handled it differently." "How?" I asked calmly. "By protecting family?" The word family hung between us, heavy with irony. She looked at me as if she wanted to argue, but knew the ground beneath her wasn't stable. "He built this company," she said finally, "and I'm trying to preserve it," I answered. Silence filled the room. She walked toward the window, staring down at the city streets below. "I grew up believing this company was untouchable," she admitted softly, "that my father controlled everything." I stood slowly, moving to stand a few feet behind her. Control is an illusion. Responsibility is not. She turned to face me, her eyes no longer defensive but uncertain. "You don't hesitate," she said, "even when it hurts people you care about." I held her gaze. "I hesitate every time. I simply don't let hesitation decide." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "I've been trying to figure out when everything changed," she said, "between us." I considered the question carefully. "It didn't change," I replied. "It revealed." Her expression shifted slightly. She understood. "The wedding," she said quietly. I nodded once. This time there was no denial, no excuses, just acknowledgement. "I was cruel," she said, her voice steady but low. "Yes," I agreed gently. She swallowed. "I've been thinking about that night a lot, about how easily I said it, how natural it felt to reduce someone." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard. "Privilege," I said softly, "often hides its sharp edges from the person holding it." She gave a faint, humorless smile. I suppose I was holding a knife without realizing it. I did not soften the truth. "You realized when it cut you." That sentence landed with precision. She didn't look away this time. "You could destroy me here," she said after a pause, "with one recommendation to the board. If I wanted destruction, you would already be gone." The weight of that truth settled deeply. She studied me as if seeing me for the first time, not as her husband's mother, not as an obstacle, but as a leader with deliberate restraint. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because power used for revenge weakens the one who wields it." I walked back to my desk and sat down. I am not interested in humiliation. I am interested in growth. She exhaled slowly, something inside her loosening. I don't know how to be this version of myself, she admitted quietly, the one who isn't always admired. I felt a flicker of compassion. Then learn, I said. Leadership is not admiration, it is service. That afternoon, Zara returned to her department and requested additional training for her team. She volunteered to oversee compliance audits personally. The shift was subtle but real. Word traveled quickly through the company that the CEO's daughter-in-law was working harder than anyone expected. Respect, I knew, is not demanded, it is built. At home, however, tension lingered. Ion called me late one evening, his voice strained. We argued, he admitted, about what happened at the wedding, about everything. I closed my eyes briefly, and he apologized, he said, fully, not defensively. Relief moved quietly through me. That matters. He hesitated. But I'm struggling with the fact that I didn't protect you. My voice softened. You were beginning your marriage. I chose silence so you wouldn't start with conflict. But maybe you shouldn't have, he said. His honesty surprised me. I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. Perhaps, I admitted, but every family learns in its own time. Days turned into weeks. The company stabilized further. Investor confidence strengthened. Mr. Rahman began consulting me not just as CEO, but as a strategist. I sensed his pride shifting from personal control to collective success. One evening after a late board session, he paused at my office door. You know, he said thoughtfully, when Zara was a child, she once told a classmate she wouldn't share toys because they were too expensive for other children. I raised my eyebrow slightly. What did you do? He replied, I bought extra toys and made her distribute them. I told her wealth means nothing if it shrinks your character. He sighed faintly. Some lessons need repeating. I met his gaze steadily. She's listening now. He nodded once, then added quietly, so am I. That evening, as I prepared to leave the building, I passed the large framed photograph of the company's founding day. Mr. Rahman stood proudly at the center, younger, ambitious. Soon a new photograph would hang beside it, one marking the beginning of the company's second era. I did not crave recognition, but I recognized something deeper had happened. The insult at the wedding had not defined me, it had tested me, and through that test I had discovered the quiet authority that comes from restraint. Yet life rarely concludes its lessons neatly, because just when stability feels secure. Pregnancy has a way of rearranging priorities. In the months that followed the gala, Zara changed in ways that no boardroom pressure could have engineered. She moved more slowly, spoke more thoughtfully, and listened longer than she used to. At the office, she became meticulous, triple-checking reports, mentoring junior staff, volunteering for compliance oversight without prompting. Employees who once described her as intimidating began describing her as driven. Respect, I noticed, had quietly replaced fear. At home, the dynamic shifted too. Ayan became protective in the way new fathers often do, hovering, researching, planning. And I watched, not as a judge, not as a rival matriarch, but as a woman who had once stood exactly where she now stood, uncertain, hopeful, vulnerable beneath strength. One evening, Zara invited me to accompany her to a prenatal appointment. The request surprised me. I thought you might want to hear the heartbeat, she said softly over the phone. In that moment, I understood the invitation was more than medical. It was symbolic. At the clinic, as we sat side by side in the waiting room, there was no corporate hierarchy between us, no family tension, just two women bound by the future of a child. When the steady rhythm of that tiny heartbeat filled the room, Zara reached for my hand instinctively. Tears slid down her cheeks, and this time she did not hide them. It makes everything else feel small, she whispered. I squeezed her fingers gently. It recalibrates what matters. As her pregnancy progressed, I noticed something subtle but profound. She began introducing me differently in social settings, not just Ayan's mother, not just the CEO, but the woman who built everything she has from nothing. The acknowledgement wasn't performative, it was respectful. The real test came unexpectedly one afternoon when we attended a charity luncheon hosted by one of Zara's longtime social circles. The room was filled with women who had grown up in wealth, who wore status as effortlessly as silk. As we sat at our table, one of them leaned toward Zara and said with a half smile, "It must be interesting having your mother-in-law as your boss. I hope she doesn't bring her village wisdom into board decisions." The comment was light, casual, but edged. I watched Zara carefully. Months ago, she might have laughed or ignored it. Instead, she straightened slightly and said, calm but clear, "Her wisdom built a company stronger than any of us expected, and I'm proud to learn from it." The table fell quiet. No laughter followed. In that small, simple defense, I felt something settle completely inside me. That was growth, not apology, not guilt, choice. Later that evening, as we drove home together, I thanked her. She shook her head gently. "I wasn't defending you," she said. "I was correcting them." I smiled faintly. That's leadership. Months later, when labor began in the early hours before dawn, Ayan called me with a trembling voice. "It's time." At the hospital, I waited outside the delivery room with Mr. Rahman. We sat side by side in silence, two very different people bound by the same anticipation. He glanced at me at one point and said quietly, "You know, when you first walked into that boardroom, I saw threat. Now I see partnership." I met his gaze steadily. Threat often looks like change before it looks like progress. He gave a small, respectful nod. Hours later, the cry of a newborn pierced the corridor. A granddaughter, healthy, strong. When they finally allowed me inside, Zara lay exhausted but radiant, the baby nestled against her chest. She looked up at me, not with superiority, not with comparison, but with something softer. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked. I stepped forward carefully, lifting the tiny bundle into my arms. Her skin was warm, impossibly delicate. As I looked down at her sleeping face, I felt time collapse. The years of struggle, the wedding insult, the boardroom battles, the quiet resilience, all of it had led here. "What will you name her?" I asked softly. Zara and Ayan exchanged a glance. "Farah," Zara said. My breath caught. "After you." For a moment I could not speak. This was not flattery, it was acknowledgement. Redemption does not erase the past, it transforms its meaning. As I held my granddaughter, my namesake, I understood the final lesson life had been shaping all along. Dignity is not about proving others wrong. It is about refusing to become small when others try to shrink you. Zara's cruel word at the wedding could have hardened me. It could have turned me vindictive. Instead, it became a mirror, for her and for me. Power revealed truth. Humility repaired it. Months later, at a small family gathering to celebrate the baby's first milestone, I wore that emerald sari again. This time, Zara adjusted its pleats gently and whispered, "It's our lucky color." I smiled, smoothing the fabric between my fingers. It always was. As laughter filled the room and my granddaughter gurgled in Ayan's arms, I realized something quiet and profound. The greatest revenge is not domination, it is evolution. She once called me a pig. Today she calls me mentor, mother, namesake. And that is a transformation no insult can undo. Pregnancy has a way of rearranging priorities. In the months that followed the gala, Zara changed in ways that no boardroom pressure could have engineered. She moved more slowly, spoke more thoughtfully, and listened longer than she used to. At the office, she became meticulous, triple-checking reports, mentoring junior staff, volunteering for compliance oversight without prompting. Employees who once described her as intimidating began describing her as driven. Respect, I noticed, had quietly replaced fear. At home, the dynamic shifted too. Ayan became protective in the way new fathers often do, hovering, researching, planning. And I watched, not as a judge, not as a rival matriarch, but as a woman who had once stood exactly where she now stood, uncertain, hopeful, vulnerable beneath strength. One evening, Zara invited me to accompany her to a prenatal appointment. The request surprised me. "I thought you might want to hear the heartbeat," she said softly over the phone. In that moment, I understood the invitation was more than medical. It was symbolic. At the clinic, as we sat side by side in the waiting room, there was no corporate hierarchy between us, no family tension, just two women bound by the future of a child. When the steady rhythm of that tiny heartbeat filled the room, Zara reached for my hand instinctively. Tears slid down her cheeks, and this time she did not hide them. "It makes everything else feel small," she whispered. I squeezed her fingers gently. "It recalibrates what matters." As her pregnancy progressed, I noticed something subtle but profound. She began introducing me differently in social settings, not just Ayan's mother, not just the CEO, but the woman who built everything she has from nothing. The acknowledgement wasn't performative, it was respectful. The real test came unexpectedly one afternoon when we attended a charity luncheon hosted by one of Zara's longtime social circles. The room was filled with women who had grown up in wealth, who wore status as effortlessly as silk. As we sat at our table, one of them leaned toward Zara and said with a half smile, "It must be interesting having your mother-in-law as your boss. I hope she doesn't bring her village wisdom into board decisions." The comment was light, casual, but edged. I watched Zara carefully. Months ago, she might have laughed or ignored it. Instead, she straightened slightly and said, calm but clear, "Her wisdom built a company stronger than any of us expected, and I'm proud to learn from it." The table fell quiet. No laughter followed. In that small, simple defense, I felt something settle completely inside me. That was growth, not apology, not guilt, choice. Later that evening, as we drove home together, I thanked her. She shook her head gently. "I wasn't defending you," she said. "I was correcting them." I smiled faintly. That's leadership. Months later, when labor began in the early hours before dawn, Ayan called me with a trembling voice. "It's time." At the hospital, I waited outside the delivery room with Mr. Rahman. We sat side by side in silence, two very different people bound by the same anticipation. He glanced at me at one point and said quietly, "You know, when you first walked into that boardroom, I saw threat. Now I see partnership." I met his gaze steadily. Threat often looks like change before it looks like progress. He gave a small, respectful nod. Hours later, the cry of a newborn pierced the corridor. A granddaughter, healthy, strong. When they finally allowed me inside, Zara lay exhausted but radiant, the baby nestled against her chest. She looked up at me, not with superiority, not with comparison, but with something softer. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked. I stepped forward carefully, lifting the tiny bundle into my arms. Her skin was warm, impossibly delicate. As I looked down at her sleeping face, I felt time collapse. The years of struggle, the wedding insult, the boardroom battles, the quiet resilience, all of it had led here. "What will you name her?" I asked softly. Zara and Ayan exchanged a glance. "Farah," Zara said. My breath caught. "After you." For a moment I could not speak. This was not flattery, it was acknowledgement. Redemption does not erase the past, it transforms its meaning. As I held my granddaughter, my namesake, I understood the final lesson life had been shaping all along. Dignity is not about proving others wrong. It is about refusing to become small when others try to shrink you. Zara's cruel word at the wedding could have hardened me. It could have turned me vindictive. Instead, it became a mirror for her and for me. Power revealed truth. Humility repaired it. Months later, at a small family gathering to celebrate the baby's first milestone, I wore that emerald sari again,